Good evening. My mail is a very interesting experience every day. And while I'm sure it would be interesting to many of you to see and read the things that go across that desk, I can assure you that the greatest experience is that which comes to me because from it comes such a great measure of unfoldment, of further experience. And without this, we would all stagnate. It is only really the problems that are brought to us, not only the problems of others, but our own, that drives us deeper into consciousness and brings us the greatest fruitage. You know, while many students feel that their goal is attaining some measure of health and supply and happiness, nothing could be a greater barrier to their spiritual progress than that very peace and harmony and happiness. The reason is that it is so easy for us to settle back into the peace that this world can give, instead of striving harder for an awareness or actual demonstration of my kingdom. Now, the goal of a spiritual path is not health and harmony and happiness. The goal of a spiritual path is the attainment of the kingdom of God. And the health and the happiness and the peace and the prosperity are merely the added things. They do come, they inevitably follow, but they are not the goal. The goal is the attainment of my kingdom, which is not of this world. And of course, I'm sure that any of you who have had any experience in healing work will recognize this, that the cases that yield quickly and easily are not the ones that provide you with spiritual growth. They come and go, and you hardly know why or how. But when a case is brought to you, regardless of its nature, if it resists treatment, prayer, meditation, if it doesn't seem to yield, if it is obstinate, this is the case that eventually carries you further and deeper into spiritual awareness. This is the case that ultimately enables you to say, whatever measure of richness has come into my experience has come through the working out of the difficult cases, the serious cases, the ones that require day and night attention. Now, there is a reason for this. In my mail, I read a great deal of dissatisfaction because I am not making the progress that I know I should make. I am not attaining the fruitage that I know I should attain. I'm not gaining an understanding with all of my study. And then there is the other side of the picture. I'm so grateful that I'm now beginning to understand the message of the infinite way. I'm so happy now that I really begin to understand its principles. But now, the danger point is that second group, not the first. The first is perfectly all right. I like to receive those letters of complaint about one's progress, and I always have a little fear when I begin to read of someone who is beginning to understand. And the reason is that I haven't yet attained that spot where I begin to understand. And so I wonder how it is that they got there. What is it that enabled them to reach an understanding of this, and I myself haven't gotten to that point? When I say these things sometimes to classes, I think that they believe, some of the students believe, that I'm being modest. Far be it from a former traveling salesman to be modest. No, I'm not modest. I'm trying to be truthful with students who are looking to me for guidance, looking to me for assistance. I don't want to mislead them. I want to be entirely truthful with them, even if I do have to reveal the fact that my understanding isn't quite as great as some of those that I read about in my letters. There's a natural reason for this. The human mind can never know truth. And it makes no difference how you develop the human mind, or how highly developed it becomes, or how much knowledge you attain. It has no relationship at all to spiritual truth. Understanding spiritual truth is as close to an impossibility as we will get for a long time. Again, there's a reason for it. The letter of truth isn't really truth. The truth that we read and that we hear, this isn't truth. One exception to that is that the truth that we hear within us, that which comes from the still small voice, this is truth. But the truth that we hear with our outer ear, or the truth that we read with our eyes, this isn't truth. The reason it can't be truth is that there isn't any truth and me. Whatever truth there is, I am. And that breaks down the duality. Now, let me show you how this operates in healing work. If anyone at all believes that they know the healing truth, they're making a terrible mistake, and they are probably blocking the way to healing. In other words, healing is an act of consciousness, an act of grace. It is an act of that part of us which is really transcendental. It is not the human mind, the thinking mind, the reasoning mind. It is a part of us that is transcendental. Now, the letter of truth plays a part in that experience, and that is going to be our main subject tonight. But I wanted to show you that the part that the letter of truth plays is in lifting us into a state of consciousness beyond thought, beyond reason, beyond the letter of truth. I remember a few years ago a church paper reviewed either Art of Meditation or Practicing the Presence, and the reviewer went on in this review to say that this man says that disease is unreal. He evidently hasn't been to any hospitals. He's a fortunate man. He probably has never been sick. Well, that is as far as you can get, really, with trying to make truth reasonable or knowledgeable. It can't be, because we do make statements like that disease is unreal, and yet you know we are not being quite that foolish as to say that it is not a part of human experience. And so to understand the unreal nature of disease means you have to transcend what the dictionary is teaching. You have to transcend what the mind has been taught to accept as reality or unreality. In this same way, if a person, an individual, a student, gets to the place of teaching truth, they must inevitably fail if they believe that they know truth. Because if they believe they know truth and understand it, they will get on the platform and try to explain it. And what they're explaining isn't truth. And you quickly realize that by watching the lack of fruitage in that experience. On the other hand, a teacher of spiritual truth must come to the platform empty, completely empty of any preconceived ideas of truth and empty of any knowledge of truth heretofore known, in order to make way for the Spirit to utter itself as truth. And I want to give you an example of that so that you may understand this thoroughly. Many of you undoubtedly have been reading The Thunder of Silence. And this book is a perfect demonstration of what I am saying about not knowing truth. It is vividly clear in my thought, in my mind, the night in this very city at the Barbizon Plaza Theater, opening night of a public lecture. And going on that platform without a single idea of what was going to come through, without any previous program being arranged, and without any knowledge of truth to impart. And out of my mouth came that which is the first third of the Thunder of Silence, all that deals with karmic law. And that's the first night that I knew that truth. That's when it was revealed to me on that platform, at the same time that it was revealed to those in the audience. In other words, if I had known truth when I went on that platform, there'd have been no room for that great revelation which came through, a revelation of such magnitude that it is really doing things out in the world, even in these 6 or 7 weeks since that book was released. Something that hasn't ever happened before to an Infinite Way book, that the first printing was sold out in 5 weeks. So you know that something happened. And part of what happened is due to that first third of the book, which reveals things heretofore not written. Again, on that same trip, there was a night in Chicago when I was so empty that I didn't want to go on the platform. I begged those close to me to go down and make an excuse so that I wouldn't have to go on the platform because I was barren. Nothing would come through. And I was told, just go down and meditate, and if nothing comes through, you'll be excused. And that night, I learned a lesson that I had waited for 25 or more years. I learned the Sermon on the Mount. Those of you who have been with me a long time know that out of all the questions that have been asked me over the years on the subject of the Sermon on the Mount, my answer always was, I can't answer you, I don't understand it. I have no light on the Sermon on the Mount. It isn't clear to me. And that night, out of that barrenness, that night, out of that emptiness, or into that emptiness, the voice poured that message that I'd really longed for 25 years. What is that secret of the Sermon on the Mount? And be assured, that is the secret of the Sermon on the Mount. And there too we are having demonstrable proof of it every day, and have been since that revelation came. Think what would have happened that night if I had known the truth and gone on the platform to give it or teach it or tell it. Why, I would have probably given out some rehashed truth, some warmed over truth, or some cold truth that was ineffectual. But no, out of the understanding of emptiness, of not knowing truth, came fresh truth, new truth, ages old, but new in revelation, new in form, new in expression, and new in power. So it is when we sit down to give help to a student, and it makes no difference whether the problem is mental, moral, physical, or financial, the attitude that I take always is, Father, enlighten me. I am not interested in yesterday's truth, yesterday's manna. I'm not interested in what somebody wrote in a book, not even what I wrote in a book, if it's more than a day old. What I'm interested in is what new, fresh revelation can be given me that will be helpful. That does not outmode the truth books and the Bible. It makes of these, it puts them rather in their proper places as sources of inspiration, sources of knowledge to help us rise higher. And that is why I want, through this means, to come to the important place that the letter of truth plays in our experience. Because it is the letter of truth, whether we read it, whether we hear it, it is the letter of truth that helps us rise in consciousness to that state of emptiness, that state of barrenness into which the still small voice can pour itself. Now, in the message of the Infinite Way, what is it that deepens our consciousness or enriches or spiritualizes our consciousness? Well, the first thing of all is this. What is the nature of God? Now just think for a moment of your religious background, former teachings, and see if you had not gathered the idea that you could ask God for things, and then if you were just good enough, God would give them to you. Or that you could sacrifice to God and something be given you. Or that you could fast or feast or go through rituals or ceremonies. And all of this would place you so in God's favor that now you could ask for anything and get it. See if in your former experiences you were not led, regardless of whether it was meant that way or not, see if you are not led to believe that there is some way of influencing God on your behalf or on the behalf of another. See if you haven't entertained the thought that you could really direct God over there to Mr. Jones or Mrs. Smith. To know Him aright is life eternal. And one of the first things that we learn, one of the first steps we take in this message, is to change our concept of God until we reach that place in consciousness where we understand that God is omniscience. Not merely declare that God is omniscience, but know and understand that God is omniscience, that is, the all-knowing, wisdom, intelligence, mind, and see what this does to you. Once you accept this, you never again can tell God anything. And if you would try to, you'd immediately be caught up and say to yourself, what am I doing? Trying to tell the all-knowing mind? Am I trying to prove that I know more than God? And this would halt you instantly from any attempt to reach up to God with your wisdom, with your requests or demands. And you would begin to perceive the nature of the Master's teaching. Your heavenly Father knoweth. Your heavenly Father knoweth that you have need of these things. And instantly, you have entered a new consciousness. You have cut yourself off suddenly from any further attempts to enlighten God or influence God or direct God. And when you do this, your consciousness changes, because now, instead of up to God with your wisdom, you are down here in your emptiness, awaiting that still small voice, waiting to hear the voice that He utters, the word that He utters that makes the earth melt. You are in a completely different consciousness now. In that very moment when you realize the nature of omniscience, never again can you say, this prayer is for Mrs. Jones. If God doesn't know it, how do you know it? And if you know it and God doesn't, you're much wiser than God. And this can't be. Oh, what a difference it makes only to accept the one word, omniscience, all wisdom, all knowledge, all intelligence, and then to be able to sit in that state of receptivity, in that inner awareness, that inner openness to truth, that inner barrenness that waits to be filled. Just with that one bit of letter of truth, you have changed your consciousness. Now, the truth that God is omniscience hasn't done anything, but it has changed your consciousness. God was omniscience. God is omniscience. And your declaration of it hasn't changed anything, but it has brought your consciousness into attunement, into a state of receptivity. We take next omnipresence. All presence, the divine presence. Here where I am, God is. The place whereon thou standest is holy ground. Take the word omnipresence as if it were literally truth. And now see what happens to your consciousness. Omnipresence, the presence of God filling all space, everywhere, here, there, and everywhere. Up in the airplane, down in the sea, out on the railroad, out on the highways and the byways. Whither shall I flee from thy presence? If I mount up to heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in hell, thou art there. If I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, thou art there. Evidently then, here where I am, God is. Do you see what happens to your consciousness? The weight that falls off your shoulder when you realize you don't have to seek God. You can give up that search for the Holy Grail. You have found it. It is right here where you are. You can stop trying to reach God. Omnipresence guarantees you that you can't reach God, because where you are, God is. Where God is, you are. For I and the Father are one. Omnipresence, where I am. And watch what this does to your consciousness. You can let go of thinking. You can let go of taking thought. You can let go of this belief that somewhere God is and why can't I find him. Of course you can't find him when him is you. The him you're seeking constitutes your very being. God is your mind, God is your life, God is your soul, God is your spirit, and your body is the temple of the living God. Now where will you go to find omnipresence? There's no going. The Master said, you need not go to the holy mountain to worship God. You need not go to that temple down there in Jerusalem. For the kingdom of God is not low here, and it's not low there. It is within you. This is the letter of truth on the subject of omnipresence, and think what it does to you once you can accept it. Just think, where I am, God is. No reaching out, just relaxing in his word, relaxing in this truth. Omnipresence. Omnipresence. Where I am, God is. I can never escape out of God, nor can God escape out of me, for we are one. I live and move and have my being in God, and God in me. I in him and he in me. Inseparable, indivisible omnipresence. There's no fear then on a battlefield, and there's no fear in the presence of bombs, and there's no fear in the presence of germs. Why? You're not separate and apart from God. You're in and of God. And God is in and of you, for we are one. So you see that omnipresence does nothing for us, but knowing this truth of omnipresence lifts us into a state of consciousness whereby we relax mental effort. We relax the strife and the struggle and rest in His Word. Well, with the same letter of truth, we come to the word omnipotence. The strange part of that word is that it occupies such a big place in religious literature and nobody believes it. Very few at any rate. Because omnipotence means all power. But now just think of all power being omnipresent and then fearing life, or fearing death, or fearing lack, or fearing germs. Tell me, what is to be feared if omnipresence is omnipotence? If there is no power but God, is there any more understanding to attain? Or is there just a resting to be achieved? Oh, no. When we have omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence, all rolled up in one package, we rest. We rest. And we open up this inner ear and say, "Speak, Lord, thy servant heareth. Thou art closer to me than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. Speak. When thou utterest thy voice, the earth melteth." So you see that the letter of truth acts to lift us into a higher consciousness where, when the chips are down, when we're in the presence of sin, disease, lack, or limitation, we can relinquish the letter and then sit with the Spirit. "Speak, Lord, thy servant heareth." Thy Spirit animates me, permeates me, governs and guides, and then let it. Yes, but then tomorrow comes, and with it tomorrow's problems. And you'd be surprised sometimes to know that thinking about omnipotence, omnipresence, and omniscience doesn't meet the need of this day. And if you're going to rely on your knowledge and just start declaring omnipotence, omnipresence, omniscience, you probably will be indulging in a form of self-hypnotism, auto-suggestion, and you won't find yourself advancing spiritually. And so now you come to the period that I speak of, the period of not knowing or unknowing, where you say, "Ah, well, omnipotence, omnipresence, omniscience, that was yesterday's manna. Now, Father, feed me today." And then as you turn within, you find that further light, further inspiration comes, and it may very well be that some letter of truth will come to your rescue and lift you into another higher state where today's manna has its effect. Now, in my experience in this work, it was the problems that came to me personally, as well as the problems that came to me through patients and students, that forced me each time to forget the truth that had done such great work yesterday but wasn't working today, and empty myself so that something new, fresh, vital could come into my experience. And thereby you will find that throughout all of the books of the Message of the Infinite Way, there are hundreds of scriptural passages, each one of which has revealed a spiritual truth and a spiritual power to me and become part of the letter of truth in the message. When it came to me, it wasn't the letter of truth, it was the spirit of truth uttering itself. When it went into a book, it became the letter of truth. With that letter of truth, you lift yourself. I remember a night, also a night of emptiness, when I heard this come out of my lips. And I'd never known this before, never heard it, never read it. It was so new that it startled me. My conscious oneness with God constitutes my oneness with all spiritual being and idea. That wasn't the letter of truth because it didn't exist anywhere in the literature of the world. I'd never yet have found anything like it, but it was the spirit of truth uttering itself to me. Now it is in the writings as the letter of truth, and it can do this for you. It can't make your demonstration, but it can lift you into a higher state of consciousness whereby your demonstration can be made. And let us illustrate that. You have a telephone in your home, and there are many millions of telephone sets all around the country and around the world, and you can't reach one of them. Not one. You can't pick up your instrument, your telephone instrument, and even reach the set in the apartment next door to you, except in one way: if you go to Central. If you connect with Central, you can then be connected with any and every number around this globe. But remember, without going to Central, you're lost with your instrument. It's of no value to you. We, in our conceit, may think that we are something, and that we can accomplish things and do things and be things. And sometimes it takes a very sad lesson to make us learn how little we are of ourselves. Sometimes we believe in that piece of nonsense, in union there is strength. And you really have to witness some of the great unions there have been in this world and watch them fall and fail, until you begin to question about, is there union? Is there strength in union? You learn eventually there isn't. The only union in which we find strength is our union with our source, the union with the Father within us, the union with Central, the headquarters, the divine. And the reason is that the moment we make contact with the source of our being, the Father within us, we have automatically made contact with everyone in the globe on our level of consciousness. And it makes no difference whether it's in this country or a foreign country. We have made contact with the individuals and with the things necessary to our experience, and they are drawn to us from all parts of the world. Not that we have any power mentally to go around this world drawing to us what we want. Sometimes, even if we succeed in that, we destroy ourselves. But if we make the practice of going to the source, to the center of our being, to God, making our contact with the Father within, then we will find somebody down the street or down the state or at the other end of the country or at the other end of the world being drawn to us to fulfill some purpose in our life, or some things being drawn to us. Now, I have witnessed since that night how true this principle is, how that by communing with the Father within, by dwelling consciously in the realization that the Father is within me, that I and the Father are one, in meditation and contemplation, eventually that awareness takes place. The Father is closer to me than breathing. There is something, a presence within me. Paul called it the Christ. I can do all things through Christ within me. I live, yet not I. Christ liveth my life. And so it is that eventually, through this letter of truth, my conscious oneness with God constitutes my oneness with all spiritual being and idea. That's the theme of the book, Conscious Union with God. That theme runs all the way through, because that was the theme of that particular class. And of course I realized quickly that my whole previous experience in truth had been a living proof of that, but I didn't know the principle until that night. And since then I have seen that that is the principle that has carried this work from one individual to 5 continents, carried it from one book to 20, from one publisher to about 12, 9, 10, 11, whatever the amount is. Not by might, nor by power, not by influence, not by any capital, but by virtue of this continuous realization, I and my Father are one. Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. All of that singing around here inside the letter of truth, but eventually enabling me to relax, and you to relax. Relax. Your conscious union with God, your continuous remembrance of omnipresence, constitutes your oneness with everything of a spiritual nature of which you will ever have need. And it will be drawn to you not by might nor by power, but by the very Spirit of God that dwells in you. You see then that this letter of truth, as we entertain it in consciousness, becomes a living truth, becomes a vital truth, becomes a realized truth. And here's where the secret is. You know as well as I do that God fills all space. You know as well as anybody else does. You know as well as Jesus Christ did that there is no place where God is not. But it has puzzled you why, if God is everywhere equally present, why is there sin, disease, death, lack, limitation, poverty, crimes, and criminals? Why, if God? It was a revelation that came to me that brought the answer. God is not anywhere in the human scene except where God is realized. It isn't actually the omnipresence of God that saves the world, because the world isn't being saved. Not noticeably. But the conscious, realized presence of God does save. You individually, and eventually this entire world. Whatever measure of good, permanent good, is coming into this world today is because there is so much of realized God in the world. In other words, whereas heretofore we merely lived on the statement God is everywhere present and didn't actually believe it or live it, whereas we knew with the mind that God fills all space, there was no God demonstrating for us. And the answer that finally revealed itself to me, which is part of our letter of truth, is God has to be realized before the effect of God is witnessed. And I'll give you lots of proof of that. Those of you who have experienced healings through metaphysical or spiritual practitioners, why did you go to those metaphysical or spiritual practitioners? Why not to the gas station on the corner, or the grocery, or the supermarket? Why not? Because you knew you couldn't get spiritual or metaphysical healing there. You could only get it from a metaphysical or spiritual practitioner. What is the difference between a metaphysical spiritual practitioner and the clerk down at the supermarket? Remember, we're all the same men and women, housewives, businessmen. No difference outwardly. What's the difference inwardly? In one, there has been a realized God experience, and that constitutes the healing consciousness. And in the other, God is still something in church on Sunday, or something the minister knows all about. And there's no healing in that consciousness. There is only healing in the consciousness of spiritual healing. There is only spiritual healing in the consciousness of an individual who realizes God, experiences God. Now, the practitioner may be working in one of the mental sciences, or Christian Science, or unity, or New Thought, or infinite way. It really makes no difference. What makes the difference is, does whatever truth the practitioner is knowing lift him or her above the ladder into the realized presence of God? And this I've witnessed now for 30 years. There are Christian Science practitioners who attain it and do wonderful healing works. There are unity practitioners, there are New Thought practitioners, there are infinite way practitioners, any of them who actually use whatever approach to truth they have been taught to the point of attained God realization, spiritual experience. They do healing work. Don't ever believe for any moment that any truth teaching has a monopoly on God or the healing experience, because that is rank stupidity. And certainly don't believe that there isn't enough truth in any of them to raise the dead, for there is. It's only a question of whether a student takes that truth and never gets beyond mentally knowing it, or whether they live and practice with these truths until they rise above the ladder into the experience. Because, and I speak to you only out of experience, I've seen loads of wonderful healing works in all of these movements. But when you trace it down, you'll find the same thing. The ones through whom they come have attained some measure of spiritual realization, some measure of God experience. Now, when God is experienced, God is on the field. But the mere declaration that God is on the field helps nobody. The mere declaration of omnipresence, omnipotence, omniscience is nothing. But working with that letter of truth until the very experience comes, until the letter is transcended and the individual feels an inner release. Any practitioner can tell you about that experience, that when they come to the end of their treatment, there's all of a sudden a letdown, or a glow, or a word spoken in their ear, or a feeling, a sensing. Really doesn't make any difference. It indicates God is on the field. Now, not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit, rest. So it is. Those who work only with the letter of truth and then think they know it, all they're knowing is a dead letter. But those who work with the letter of the truth, knowing that working with it is going to lift them above it to the actual experience, they attain it. And so it is that there are certain specific truths in the letter of truth which change our consciousness. Some of those I have just given you. When you go through the writings and note how in the many different meditations there are different facets of truth revealed, you will see why it is that once you are familiar with the letter of truth, that you can sit down and just the one specific truth that you need will come to your rescue, and it will lift you then above the letter into this spirit. See now why in all our classwork I say to the students, you must learn the letter of truth, the correct letter of truth. You must have certain specific principles with which to work, and you must work with them until you attain the consciousness of them, until you reach the place, I suppose, in piano playing where you can play without notes in front of you. Why? Because something different takes the place of the notes, and you go along without them. So it is that eventually you reach a place where you do not always necessarily think of a truth, because it is so simple now just to sit back, open the ear, and receive a truth from within. It may be one or more of those that you have studied, or, as in the cases that I've explained to you tonight, it can be something very original, something you never heard before or knew before, and often something that's never before been consciously known or written about. Many wonderful truths, you know, were known to the ancient mystics, but have not come down to us in writings. And the reason is that they themselves at the time may not have committed anything to paper, and those to whom they imparted it could not sufficiently understand what they were being told to be able to do it correctly. I read tonight that the principles revealed by Gautama the Buddha were not committed to paper until 400 years after he had left this plane. Well, I'm sure if you read the papers and see how inaccurately the reporters report what they were told even yesterday, you will know how accurate they must be 400 years from now. Now, you wouldn't want to believe much, that is the accuracy of much that you read in the papers, even the day after it was made news. Think how much less you'd like to believe one of our students a month from now as to what was said here tonight. It is for this reason that while we have truth in print, while we have these revelations in print and on tape, that we need to avail ourselves of them until they become a part and parcel of our very being and enable us to relax. I have had experience lately with children through these classes which we have just recently started on scriptural quotations. And I wish you could know the things that are happening in school to children, in their marks, in their work, just through knowing or carrying into the school with them the idea that he within me does the work, he performeth it. I can do nothing, but he can. And then that little relaxed feeling that must come to them when they realize, wait, the responsibility isn't mine, and then all of a sudden what they need jumps into expression. We're having wonderful experiences right now with children, just on that very basis, carrying some passage of Scripture with them, and then when the moment of need comes, declaring it and relaxing in it and watching it unfold. Well, our entire experience on this path is just that once it becomes clear that he performeth that which is given me to do, or he perfecteth that which concerneth me, there is an ability within to let go, to drop the responsibility even for a second, and in that very second what we need comes into expression. So it is that as we go forward, statements of a deeper nature take the place of the simpler statements, the beginning statements, and eventually, if we are faithful with our work, we come to a place where we rise completely above the letter. And should there be a need for a letter, it would be revealed to us from within, from the depths of our own being, because the center of life, the source of life, is within each and every one of us. That is part of the miracle of this world, that the fountain of life, the source of life, isn't outside any place in the world. The Holy Grail is not out there. The fountain of youth is not out there. The source of wisdom is not out there. Nor is it even in a holy man, any more than it is in us. The whole source of life, the source of all the oceans and the stars and the sun and the moon, is within you. That's the miracle. When we awaken to that truth, that which forms this entire world is within you. It needs only that we open out a way for that imprisoned splendor to escape. Only for us to realize that the Son of God is buried in the tomb of our ignorance. And through our spiritual enlightenment, the Son of God is raised up in us until we are no longer mortals. The mortal has been crucified, not only by the pains of this world, but by the pleasures of this world. The mortal is crucified, and the Son of God is risen up. And then all of a sudden, we attain our new identity. We come into the conscious realization of our divine sonship, heir of God, joint heir to all the heavenly riches. Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. Well, for a moment I'm just going to say thank you, and till we meet again tomorrow night.